Hello. It can be somewhat disconcerting when reading a current author's work over a long period of time, especially when those books are autobiographical or semi-autobiographical, because when tragedies occur in reality to that author, it can feel all the more shocking because I feel like I've gone on a journey with this author. So I've been reading the work of Yiyun for quite a while. I've read a number of her fictional books and her semi-autobiographical books. So there is her book, Dear Friend from My Life, I Write to You in Your Life, which is this beautiful meditation on reading and the role that literature plays in our lives. But she also alludes in this book to her suicide attempts. And this was published in 2017. And then there is her book, Where Reason Ends, which was published in 2019, which is a fictional conversation between a mother and her child, the child who has committed suicide. And this is made all the more poignant and moving knowing that Yiyun Li's son Vincent killed himself when he was a teenager. And now Yiyun Li has published a memoir called Things in Nature Merely Grow. And this is a meditation on the suicide of her second son, James, who committed suicide last year. And that such a tragedy would actually happen to someone is almost unimaginable. And like she comments in this book that if this was fiction, it would seem unrealistic, but this actually happened. And so she hones this experience and her meditations upon it into a message and ponderings which are both personal to her and have a universal meaning. And I know for many readers, won't want to approach this book because the subject matter is so incredibly heartbreaking and difficult to read about. But I want to discuss why I found reading this memoir both poignant and moving, and that it really helped me think about the process of bereavement in a different way that I hadn't considered before. Her son James did kill himself last year, and she writes at the very beginning of the absolute shock of this news, but she knew also that he really struggled as an individual, as did her other son Vincent, who killed themselves several years ago. And they were both in therapy, and she tried speaking to them about issues that they were facing. But this book is her coming to this radical acceptance and coming to terms with the fact of this, because there's no getting around this. And she doesn't meditate so much on the how or why this occurred for either of her sons. That's not really the most important issue of the book. And it's not about a book that's kind of another story about a process of grieving, because grieving is a word that Yiyun Li actively dislikes using, doesn't find it a very helpful term, because the implication is that you grieve for a period of time and then at some point you get over it and normalcy reinstates itself in your life. But as she discusses in this book, there's no going back to a normal state of life after something this horrific and tragic has occurred. She refers in multiple times in this book to feeling like she is now living in an abyss. And there's no real getting out of that, but rather than fighting against it or wailing nonstop, as some do in kind of Greek tragedies, it's more she decides that there's no point in fighting this. So it's more about taking practical steps forward in order to continue living with the burden and heft of this knowledge and this loss in her life. And this book is both a tribute to her son James, and in a way that both this book was a tribute to her son Vincent, and a way kind of to keep them with her. But she takes quite different approaches to discussing her sons' lives in these two books, because her sons were very different from each other. And so the forms of the books take on these different forms to discuss their lives. And so in this book, she discusses how her son James, he was a very intelligent, he sort of lived in his thoughts. That's the kind of impression and sense she gives in this book. And I found the sections where she shares bits about his life and physical objects that are left in the household from him, that this became very poignant, and it forms this beautiful memorial of his life in this way. But more than that, it is looking at the process of bereavement and how to persist and carry on in this. And so when she moved to a new property, she'd planned to work with her sons in the garden to cultivate it, but she is no longer able to do that now. She just has to work in the garden on her own, and she doesn't see the process of watching things grow and all of the satisfactions of watching one's work in a garden come to fruition as a metaphor of how life carries on. She sees these kinds of metaphors as like trivializing the seriousness and weight of the process of bereavement, but more that this is just what one has to do, and things will just carry on growing. And I've found that such a beautiful way to conceptualize and think about the practical steps one needs to take to get over a tremendous loss in one's life, because all of us, no matter what, we are inevitably going to lose people in our lives who we have loved, and that can sometimes happen very suddenly. And I've certainly experienced this in the past, and I've always struggled to know how to handle bereavement. I don't feel like I've ever really known what to do. I mean, my natural reaction to losing someone is to acknowledge it, and then now it's been acknowledged, now we can just carry on and just not think about it anymore. And I don't know really why that is. Maybe it's something about my personality, but I think it's also kind of characteristic of American experience that more widely, that a lot of people, don't want to deal with death or find it very awkward and difficult to deal with. And there's a lot in this book too about how people around her react to this. Some friends are incredibly supportive and make gestures, both small and large, which really help her in carrying forward. And there's one bit of advice that I found especially meaningful, in which she refers to multiple times of, naturally, because both of her sons have committed suicide, she has the thought of, I must be the worst mother in the world. And her friend very wisely says, like, that thought, that idea, it's just a pebble that's come in your way, and it's best to just kick that aside or walk around it, to not give thoughts and ideas like that the credence in your consciousness, because they'll inevitably be destructive. There's no practical use to thinking things like that. And somehow having this visual image of a pebble that you just kick aside and then you carry on does feel very helpful in how to go forward. And also, I've found that if the circumstances of this weren't tragic enough, I found there's an extra layer of tragedy to this, in that multiple times through the book, she refers to one of her friends as Edmund, of Edmund White, who is a great author and who was a colleague of hers at Princeton University, and who is a friend that I knew as well, and who died earlier this year. And I made a video about why Edmund White's writing was so important to me and why he was so important to me personally as a friend. And I don't know Yiyun Li personally, but yeah, reading those sections, it added this extra layer of tragedy to the story that I wasn't expecting. And she also refers in this to how when her son committed suicide, she was a judge on the Booker Prize. And I do remember from the ceremony of that in 2024 of going to the prize ceremony and seeing Yiyun Li there, and thinking, well, I would like to say hello to her and introduce myself to her, to tell her how much I've appreciated her books, but also that we have this mutual friend in Edmund White. But because the ceremony is a big party, there's lots of people there, and the judges especially are very busy throughout the evening. So I didn't get a chance to speak to her, which is totally fine, but I do remember seeing her there. And so I feel in a way that, very lightly, her experience is kind of brushed up against aside my own, and it brings the issues and reality of what has happened to her home all the more. But she also gives examples in this, several examples of people's sometimes very strange reaction to someone who has experienced such a tragic and horrific loss, that sometimes people will make it more about themselves than about the person who is going through this bereavement, in how they speak to them and interact with them. And there are some truly shocking things that are said to her, and that she experiences, from just the slightly callous to the outright horrifically rude statements that some people can make. But also because she is an author and a public figure now, that there have been news articles about her second son's suicide, and that especially in the Chinese media, how she has been vilified for this. And it's kind of unimaginable the way that some people react to others who have experienced such a sense of loss, and feel this sense of entitlement to comment upon their lives and pass judgments upon them, when really it's nobody's business but their own. And I'm sure people might criticize Yiyun Li for writing about this at all, about something that is so intensely private. And it feels like, in a way, this book is to counteract some of both the private and public statements that have been made about her personally. But also, she is a writer. This is what she does. And books and the process of writing is how she lives. It's part of her life. So to not write about these experiences would seem equally strange. And there's this poignant line in the book where she writes, "There is no real salvation from one's own life. Books, however, offer the approximation of it." And as someone who is a big reader who lives by books, I couldn't imagine my life without reading. That really hits home, that, books are both kind of a sanctuary and a place where we can process and think about these larger personal things and much wider things to do with life and how to handle them. And so I really appreciated the perspective she gives in this book about the process of bereavement, not necessarily as sort of practical advice, but as meditating about these larger issues of loss and the impact and meaning we allow it to have upon our lives when there is so much about our lives that we can't control. And so reading this book, I found to be extremely meaningful. And again, I can fully appreciate that some readers might not want to approach it unless you are in the right frame of mind. But I think, books have a way of coming to us when we sort of need them. And I'm glad that this book came to me now. So if you've read this book, I would love to hear what you think about it in the comments below, or if you're interested in reading about it now, or if there are any other books about bereavement that you've read which you found especially impactful when dealing with these incredibly difficult feelings. But thank you for watching me discuss this book. I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.